This is episode 71 of Cinescope, and we are the voice of peace, and bit by bit we will change this world. Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today is Gabriel Green to talk about one of our favorite films, How to Train Your Dragon 2. Gabe, how are you doing?
I am doing pretty good. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah, this is your first time on the show solo, sans James. So it's nice to have you on. And this was a film that you requested a couple months ago, and the timing just seemed right.
Mm-hmm. And it's been a long time since we talked last, right?
Yeah, a whole long time, just a week or two, to be honest. How about you reintroduce yourself and sort of reintroduce your show too, since it's changing up here pretty soon. And then we can talk about what we talked about.
Yeah, so my name's Gabriel Green, and I have a show that I run with our pal James Hamrick. It's called Franchise Fatigue. Formerly, it was called Underrated, and we talked about underrated films, but we actually rebooted it over the past month. It's actually not up right now. It should be up within a week. We will be starting on the Indiana Jones series and talking our way through all those films, and we had you on to talk about the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So that's who I am and what I do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to those going live so I can listen to your thoughts on the first three Indiana Jones films and then prepare myself for the backlash on the fourth Indiana Jones film. Although I think I was fair and critical as well, which is something I don't do on Cinescope, but it was nice to sort of to swing the criticism hammer a little bit on yours. So I'm looking forward to releasing that.
Yeah, it's not like there was much to criticize in that film, you know?
Yeah, nah, not at all. My favorite scene is the one with the fridge.
Oh yeah, that's really good.
Well, before we upset too many people, let's go ahead and jump into our discussion if you're ready. It is kind of late at night, and we're getting a late start, but that's okay because this is a great film.
Oh yeah.
So we are talking about How to Train Your Dragon 2. I previously talked about the first How to Train Your Dragon with my best friend Andrew a little more than a year ago. This movie was released on June 13th of 2004 and was directed by co-director of the first film, Dean DeBlois, who also co-directed Lilo and Stitch with Chris Sanders, as well as How to Train Your Dragon, Haima, which is a documentary on the band Sigur Rós, and he is set to direct the, hopefully, end of the trilogy. I don't know if we'll see more How to Train Your Dragon films in the future, but it's planned trilogy right now, so he'll be directing How to Train Your Dragon 3. He also wrote this film, and the music is by returning composer John Powell, the king of animated movie scores. He also composed Ants, Chicken Run, Shrek with Harry Gregson Williams, The Road to El Dorado, Kung Fu Panda, and Kung Fu Panda 2 with Hans Zimmer, and The Bourne Identity, Supremacy, Ultimatum, and Jason Bourne recently with David Buckley. This film, Pan, the recent Ferdinand, and is actually set to compose the score for the next Star Wars anthology film, Solo.
Which is cool with me.
Yeah, same here. Quick aside, I read recently that John Williams is actually going to be composing like a main theme for Solo, and then Powell will be composing the rest of the score. So I'm excited to see how they play around with that. That sounds like an awesome collaboration.
Yeah, he seems to be a good collaborator.
This movie does star Jay Baruchel, Kate Blanchett, Gerard Butler, Craig Ferguson, America Ferrera, Christopher Mintz-Plasse, Jonah Hill, T.J. Miller, Jimon Hounsou, and Kit Harington. So, as always, let's start off. What was your first experience, and sort of give your background on your experience with the first film as well?
I think we just watched the first one as a family. I don't remember my first viewing, but I quickly became a huge fan of it. And so when the second one came out, I think I saw it opening night, and probably 2 or 3 more times in the theater. I know I saw it at least twice, but just as far as how it relates to the first film, I think I might like it just slightly less, but in a weird way, I think it's a far more mature and a thoughtful movie, and probably I would put it up there with Two Towers and Empire Strikes Back as one of the best sequels out there. It just takes everything that I loved about the first film and expands on it and dives way deeper in there and asks really hard questions of these characters and does things that I'm pretty shocked they did in an animated film. So I really love this movie.
Same here. I mean, I've gone over this story before, but I didn't see the first film in theaters. It sort of caught me by surprise because DreamWorks traditionally hasn't been a studio that I paid a whole lot of attention to their animated fare for. I liked the first two Shrek films, I suppose. I liked their earlier efforts like Ants. But even then, I've only seen Ants maybe twice in my life. So I didn't see How to Train Your Dragon in the theater, but I saw it in snippets, like in pieces on the TV in my stateroom on a cruise ship back in like 2010, 2011. And that was the first time I'd seen any of it. And I liked it a lot. And I got it on Blu-ray eventually. And over time, I fell in love with it. And to be quite honest, the first How to Train Your Dragon film might be my favorite animated movie ever. There are certainly some Pixar contenders, which I'm not going to go into here, but How to Train Your Dragon is so high on my list of not only animated films, but just films in general. In fact, I just got a black kitten about a month ago, and I almost named him Toothless. I would have named him Toothless if the name he had already wasn't so great for his personality, but that's beside the point. So news of the sequel had me skeptical, hopeful, but, How to Train Your Dragon wasn't DreamWorks' first successful effort. They had proven a few times that they could make good films and even great sequels with stuff like Shrek 2, as I mentioned. And when I finally got around to seeing this one in theaters, I saw it as a double feature with the first film. It might have even been in IMAX, which was amazing. So I got to see the first one on the big screen for the first time, followed immediately by the sequel.
That's awesome.
And oh yeah, it was so good. Test drive on the big screen. Good stuff. But I mean, it's unbelievable that they matched. I would say they at least, or maybe just slightly undermatched the quality of the first film. This film is so good. It's so pretty to look at. It builds on things that were started in the first film. And in most ways, this one actually makes me more like emotional. This one affects me more on an emotional level than the first one does. The first one's like just a joyful movie experience. And it's interesting to watch the Hiccup and Toothless relationship unfold and strengthen. But here, we can use this to transition into story elements. They time jump, and we see that they have been best friends for a long time now. We see the positive effect of Hiccup's actions from the first film on Burke and his positive relationship with his father now, though they do have their new obstacles to overcome within that relationship. And it's just amazing to me that they were able to take such a fantastic, top-notch film and in some ways improve it, and in all ways really just like drive a stake into my heart in the best ways.
Yeah, there are some pretty hefty emotions in this movie.
And like I said, I just love the time jump. I like that they didn't feel the need to sort of bridge the gap. It was just, this movie took place in this time period, and this movie took place 5 years later. And Hiccup is a young adult now. He's matured. He has established himself, but he's still figuring himself out. And we get to see the positive effects on the dragons in Burke with stuff like the dragon races, the saddle construction, fire prevention, all these things that show that the dragons are such a big part of their society now. They were before, but it was because they were hunting them, they were killing them, and now it's recreational and they're friends with them. And it's just interesting how it's come full circle. Yes, Hiccup made a positive effect on the city, but he's still sort of struggling with identity in a different way than he was in the first film. And I like that continued theme of who we are.
Yeah, I also just about the animation, I love the updated character designs. They're just very subtle change. They still look like the same people, but these wonderful little changes, making them into adults. And like you said, the character arcs in this film are very much continuations of where they were going at the end of the first film. It's a completely believable sequel as far as all the themes and arcs it's dealing with.
And man, the flight sequences, the set design, everything is beautiful. The cinematography, not even just like at the beginning when he's flying through the open air over the ocean and the clouds and all that kind of stuff, but even the combat sequences where they're flying around the bewilder beasts and they're diving in and out between giant creature legs. It's no wonder when you look at the credits and you see Roger Deakins' name pop up, because he was a visual consultant on the visual design of the film, on the cinematography of the film. This past year, we saw him doing stuff with like Blade Runner 2049, and it just shows that everything this man touches is gold visually, and it is such a pretty movie to look at.
Yeah, and watching the special features, he was actually with them on location scouts and stuff, so he was pretty involved. And I mean, it shows. I mean, if the first film is color-wise is kind of flat greens and grays, but it's like totally expands the visual palette, and just some of the compositions in here are like some of my favorite all-time, like any film, not just animated films.
Yeah, and the introduction of all these new dragons in this dragon haven really helps with that, and the introduction of the bewilder beast that breathe ice instead of fire, and so we have these jagged ice compositions that sort of signify both destruction and beauty. It's a really cool use of color in that ice effect and in just the design of the dragons. And you get into the haven where he meets his mother, and you see all the dragons flying around, and it's just color after color after color. And the contrast that I think stands out the most to me is that in the first film, the dragons were feared, and so they were sort of darker, muted colors. And now in this one, they're not feared by the people of Berk. They are celebrated. They're used recreationally. They're friends and pets. And so they do take on a much brighter appearance. Even stuff like the Gronkel, that fish legs flies around, has a little bit more of a spriteful personality than it did in the first film. So I really like that.
So instead, Drago's gray.
Right. I love how this movie, aside from building characters, aside from building themes, it takes certain scenes in the first film and sort of echoes them here. Like the This Is Berk intro and outro. That's how we start and end the first film. That's how we start and end this film. And it's a great way to sum up where we start, and then at the end, the journey that we've gone on and sort of the outlook of the character. And then there's stuff like the test drive sequence from the first film, which was huge in establishing this connection between Hiccup and Toothless. And we get that at the very beginning of this one, where we're seeing their bond is stronger than ever 5 years later. And they're experimenting with something else. They figured out flying, but now Hiccup's trying his own gliding. And it's just really cool how they echo these things from the first film and bring them into the second film in a new light.
Yeah, I love those intros and outros just because Hiccup is so snarky, and I love his quotes. But it, as you said, it's just such a beautiful and simple way of showing where the culture is now. And I know you have a section talking about music later, but the music, This Is Berk from the first one, it's basically almost beat for beat the same, except for these little bits where it'll break off in these really creative, fun ways. So it's called a dragon racing, but it just brings you right back and shows you what's the same, what's different, and just gives you a great update on where this world is now in a very fun way.
Right. And the music, we will talk about the music, but the music is another way in which they bring elements of the first film forward and build upon them and add to them. And it's just amazing. I can't get over how great the sequel was, because we didn't expect the first film to be any good, and then it was. And then we sort of didn't expect the second film to be any good, and it was almost as good or just as good as the first one. It just blows my mind that they were able to so consistently make these characters that we care about and tell these stories that we're invested in. And it's just amazing. So let's go ahead and talk about those characters. Starting off with Hiccup and by extension, Toothless. What do you have to say about him to start with?
I have a lot to say about Hiccup. I don't know if I can exactly talk about him without going into the whole story, because the way his arc, his father's arc, and Drogo kind of their stories all intersect and interweave. But just, I guess, kind of on a basic level, uh I love how coming off the first film, even though he's in a really good place with his father, with the tribe, he's still going through that phase that, young adults go through, where you kind of, you don't want to settle down into any one job or any one thing. You kind of, you're afraid to lose that kind of, that freedom you had as a child or a teenager. And I like that even he still has a great relationship with his father in a way, but there's still that disconnect between them, which is no doubt carrying over from their very strained relationship earlier, to where he's just very resistant to becoming chief. Probably a lot of that is due to simply he doesn't want to become his father. That's kind of something that's been a negative to him for all his life. And so to see him across this film find his place in the world, and learn to accept the good things about who his father was. I love it. We're looking at how hard their relationship was at the opening of the first one, till by the end, where he's using his father's quotes, a chief protects his own, and leading the people by taking everything that was good about Stoic, along with the things that make Hiccup special as a person, and you're just leading the people forward in a way that isn't disrespectful of the past, but uses the good things about it in just a really, I think, intelligent, balanced way. Because if I had one criticism of the first one, it was just it's kind of that cliched, teenagers are right, adults are wrong, the whole world needs to change. And I think this comes with a much more balanced look at it, to where Hiccup isn't always right. In fact, his main quest for the first half of the film ends disastrously, as with his father being killed. But what I love is he takes that knowledge and then finds a way to fuse the new and the old into something that's even stronger than either could be.
We've said this, it's the continuation of the same struggle he had in the first film. It's just changed a little bit. At the beginning, he's gotten his village and his father on the side of the dragons with him, but now he wants to explore and to chart new territories since he can, but his father wants him to be chief, and he just doesn't fit in that way. In the first one, he doesn't want to kill dragons, and now he doesn't want to lead his people. He wants the freedom to just be whatever he is, and unfortunately, he's still trying to figure that out. So I like seeing that journey. I do like that he fails in this film in a bigger way than he does in the first one. He's headstrong. He's overconfident in his abilities, sort of just like Drago is, really. He's well-intentioned, but just a bit naive, because he is ignoring his parents. Not only his father, who tells him it's a bad idea to confront a man who kills without reason because it can't be reasoned with. And then when he mentions it to his mother later, after they've had their reunion and been properly introduced to each other, she sort of says the same thing. There's no talking with Drago. He's like, wait a second, I thought you, of all people, would be on my side. But it's because he's not listening to reason himself. And it does lead to his father's death. And it stings when Stoic is gone. He feels like he failed him. But thankfully, he does have his mother there in his life now. And she sort of helps him to realize that Hiccup's destiny wasn't to follow in any one of his parents' footsteps. And it was a mix of both, really, to be true to himself. He's a natural-born leader. He formulates a plan when it's time. And he does use the dragons to accomplish that, which is something that his father wasn't necessarily able to do. And then finally, when it's his time to step into that role as chief at the very, very end of the film, he doesn't hesitate. There's no qualms. There's no pauses or debates. It's just, okay, I am ready for this. My father's sacrifice is not in vain. I am proud to follow in his footsteps now. He's figured out who he is, and I really love that journey.
Yeah, and just on a more slighter level, I love how he has all these new gadgets
Yeah.
that he didn't have in the first film. And I love that the film never really calls attention to any of them. They're just all around a part of his life. And he's just constantly, pulling them out, playing with them. And it's just there, and it doesn't call attention to it, but it makes such a wonderful level that every time you watch this, I'm noticing a different thing he's doing with these little gadgets and whatnot.
It sort of reminds me of in the first film, if you watch Gobber, every single scene, he has a different hand attachment. Which I don't think people will always realize on the first viewing. And so that's something that rewards you. And in this one, it's the same way where you get to see another little thing that Hiccup has invented, whether it was the more obvious ones like his fire blade or his
Which is
wings.
the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, it's really cool. But then it becomes more than just a fire blade, and it becomes like a gas leak that is able to set off chain reactions, and he uses that against Drago in the final fight. It's really cool how not only he has matured, but also his dexterity with tools, and that really sort of is epitomized in that first opening scene with Toothless, where he's wearing his mask, and we know who it is, obviously. But that opening flight scene, they are so completely in sync with each other. To see the two of them paired together is to see the two of them complete.
Yeah.
And that's even referenced towards the end of the film when Hiccup blinds Toothless to protect him from the Alpha, and he says, "You and me as one," and that really is the definition of their relationship. And it's so cool. I go back to the formation of that friendship in the first film with the forbidden friendship, where it's no dialogue. It's just them feeling each other out. And here they've completely feeled each other out. They're 5 years into their friendship, and they are 100% in sync with each other. And it's just awesome to watch.
Yeah. That the device of Toothless not being able to fly properly without Hiccup on, because Hiccup shot his tail off, is just so perfect, and it just perfectly captures their friendship. And I mean, it's hard to talk about Hiccup without talking about Toothless. And did you notice there seems to be a lot of Stitch from Lilo and Stitch in Toothless's character, which obviously makes sense being the same directors, but there's just so much life behind him as a character. There's never once where I just think, oh, that's just is just an animal. There's just so much personality, even in the background where Hiccup will be in the foreground talking with someone. Toothless is always doing something funny or cute or crazy in the background. It's just, and when they're together, just it's almost like dialogue, except for only one of them is speaking, but they feel so complete together.
Mm-hmm. It's such a cool friendship. It's one of my favorite movie friendships, I think, because they do build off of each other. They do work together so well because they have to work together so well. And that really is the highlight of their friendship, is that they need each other and they are part of each other. And that is so cool. Now,
yeah, Toothless can't fly without Hiccup, and Hiccup definitely can't fly without Toothless.
Right. That's exactly right. Now, what about Stoic? I was going to talk about the mother first, but I think Stoic is a good one to move on to next.
I love Stoic. I mean, and this is another place where I think the film takes what was done in the first one and drastically improves it. Like Stoic, in the first one, they definitely go out of their way to make him sympathetic and give him some really great human moments, but he's still like incredibly harsh. And in this film, they do this like beautiful little retcon that would make like J.K. Rowling proud by having Hiccup's mother have been killed by a dragon. So now all of his hatred towards the dragons makes perfect sense. They killed the woman he loved, and as we see here, he really loved her. So it's kind of one of those things where a sequel does a little change to make the original better. But just as a character, the way him and Hiccup interact, they are constantly going head to head, but there's never a second of doubt in this film that Stoic absolutely loves him and would give his life for him and would do the same for any one of the people in his tribe. He is such a wonderful leader. And while I think neither Hiccup or Stoic are fully right in the film. There's still there's truth in both of what they have to offer. And, having him die, I mean, it sounds kind of sadistic, but I absolutely love that he does sacrifice himself for his son, and, which gives, Hiccup the ability to finally come into his own. But I think the big thing for Stoic in this film is obviously finding Valka. And, man, boy, do they sell this relationship. For the fact that we know nothing. The only thing we knew about it in the first film was that it was half a breastplate kind of thing, right. And even that was
keeps her close,
Yeah, it was a really nice little moment, And I think Gerard Butler just really got a good job, putting that emotion into his voice. But here, that moment when he finally finds Valka, and she's obviously kind of almost terrified because she knows she was wrong to leave, and she's kind of going through this entire argument that she's probably rehearsed in her head, dozens of times over the years. And he just doesn't say it. He just walks up and just touches her face, and you're as beautiful as the day I lost you. And it's just like I cry there every time because the animation is so good. Because you look into his eyes, you see nothing but this, this absolute longing for the woman he's loved that's been gone for so long. And just the fact that they can put so much character into that relationship with so little dialogue, just purely through visuals and just the emotion of the actors. Gerard Butler is absolutely fantastic in this, especially when he's talking with Valka. And then there's song. I mean, when he just goes over there, starts whistling, and then for the half second where he's afraid she's not gonna accept him again, you just see this heartbreaking look of sadness, and then the joy in his face when she starts singing again. I mean, every second where he is with Valka, I think is it. If I could only take one subplot from this film, I think it would be their relationship.
Yeah, the relationship with Valka is definitely a highlight for me as well. I cry at that scene as well every time. You're not alone, because after it being so many years, he thinks she's dead, and he really does have every right. She had the means to come back. He has every right to be angry with her over not returning. But his first thought, and even his second thought or third thought, he doesn't even consider anger. It's love from the start. And he does say, "You're as beautiful as the day I lost you." And it's like his voice breaks as he says that, and she sheds a single tear, and it's beautiful. It is such a wonderful moment, and I can't help but put myself in Hiccup's shoes in that moment, where he is seeing his parents, one of whom he thought was dead. He's probably fantasized something about this all his life. What would it be like to have both my parents? And here he is with both of his parents, still very much in love with each other after all this time. And they have this dance scene, and it is so beautiful, so wonderful. I love that relationship. And then later, when Drago attacks and they all go out there and they start doing their part, he sticks to her and he protects her with his every ounce of strength. He doesn't let her out of his sights if he can help it. And everything he does is to protect her first, and then to protect Hiccup next. And that is the moment when he dies. And man, that sacrifice destroys me every single time, like sobbing. That is such a tough scene for me because it is so well done. And it's like this thing in my stomach just drops, or in my throat, and all of a sudden when you realize, I wish I could remember my very first theater reaction, because you see it coming, you see it happening, you understand what's about to happen before it happens, and it is heartbreaking, but it also feels necessary after the fact. It's not just like, oh, well, they killed Stoic, way to go, killing a character. I think that it raises the stakes, but it also helps Hiccup to solidify who he is. He's a person like his father who will do what it takes to protect his people, no matter the personal cost. And once he understands that about his father, I think he knew that about his father, but once he sees it in action, he understands that he has to follow in those footsteps because those are admirable footsteps to follow in.
Yeah, and on top of giving on top of adding stakes, it gives consequences to the actions of the characters, which rarely ever happens in animated films. How many animated films are there where they do the fake out death, where it looks like they're dying? I mean, the first one does it actually, where a character seems to be dead, but then wait, they're fine. And first time watching this, you're kind of you're expecting that trope to come back, that he's going to wake up again, but man, they do it, and I absolutely applaud the film for having the guts to do that, and then having the skill to make it this meaningful to the story.
Now, as for the other parent, Valka, I like her a lot too. I think Cate Blanchett does a great job voicing the character.
Yeah.
And again, I have to put myself in Hiccup's shoes in the moment where he meets his mother for the first time and learns that she is basically an extension of who he has become naturally. How masterful with dragons she is. How fond of keeping the peace she is. Just like him. How emotional that would make me, and how I don't even know how to describe it, but just the connection that would instantly form knowing that the mother that I never knew, I became like. And she even says, after all this time, who would have thought you'd take after me? And it's really cool to see how, yes, she's sort of lost the sense of human connection, in that she doesn't have that sort of pause where she apologizes right off the bat or says anything redemptive of herself right off the bat, since she has been absent for all of his life. She instead turns to the dragons and says, let me show you this place that you're going to think is pretty cool, because I think it's pretty cool. And she slowly learns over the course of the film to form those human relationships a little bit more, as she's reintroduced to Stoic, and as she spends more time with Hiccup and comes around the other people who are taking risks and sacrificing themselves for their dragons and for each other. But I just love that Valka is an extension of Hiccup as we came to know him in the first film, and we see him at the start of this one, and they immediately have that connection with each other. Yes, it's sad that she was gone for so long, but yes, it's really cool that they are so similar.
Yeah. And talk about an introduction when she just comes out of the clouds beside him with that awesome mask. And then the scene where she flies her four-winged dragon Cloudjumper flies up in front of them, and they're both just kind of flapping in place, and just the clouds just starting up around. That's one of the great visual moments. But just as a character, I love Cate Blanchett's accent, and the way they animated. There's a very kind of feral, animalistic quality to how she moves, and like she touches everything, and the way she speaks. The sentence structure is a little odd, and the inflections are a little off. You really buy she hasn't really spoken much to people in a decade or 2 decades or whatever. And all it's just little touches like that make her feel like a real person, that that is a part of this world around her. And the way she interacts with the dragons in the flying with mother sequence, as she's kind of running along the wings and bouncing around Hiccup in the updraft, it's just a really great visual character, as well as I think a solid character emotionally.
And it's cool that she introduces us to new things about the dragons that we didn't know, because that was sort of Hiccup's job in the first film. And we learned things in the training sequence of that film where grass, this special kind of grass, sort of renders them playful and just flops them over, or whatever else Hiccup shows us in the first film or discovers in that first film. Here is someone who spent a couple decades with dragons and has figured out all the tricks. And so she brings up the spines along Toothless's back and talks about, I don't even know, she's able to sort of incapacitate I always confuse her names, Toothless, incapacitate Toothless and sort of put him aside so that she can be more one-on-one with Hiccup. It's really cool that she sort of expands the dragon lore, if you will.
Yeah, and I love how proud Toothless is of those the flaps on his back.
Yeah.
He just spends the whole scene bouncing around, showing them off to people like a little puppy. And I just also about Toothless, I love how he's almost kind of bashful when he goes into the dragon sanctuary, where everywhere else he's kind of the king of the hill. He's the best dragon there is, but then he comes into all these other dragons. He's like, he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know his place, and it's just little bits like that make him such a well-rounded character, despite of being a completely non-verbal animal.
And then we have our villain, Drago Bloodfist. Bloodfist? Yeah.
Bloodfist.
Yeah, Bloodfist. Okay, just want to make sure I was saying that correctly. Jimon Hunsao voices a character. He's the master of dragons, or he thinks of himself as the master of dragons. He's also the master of ego. When he's told of Hiccup, the greatest dragon master out there, he says, "I alone control the dragons." And he has the same sort of overconfidence that I mentioned with Hiccup earlier in the film, but Hiccup is able to overcome that overconfidence, whereas with Drago, it's sort of his downfall. But man, what a great villain he is.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I love his accent. I think it really serves his character well, and there's this musical cue for him that something about him just feels so foreign and alien. Like he's literally kind of this foreign or this alien presence coming into the Vikings world, and it's a really unsettling theme for him. But just the way he his philosophy of the world is all about control. Like, he grew up in fear, so he decided to become that fear, and to try and be the king of the hill by controlling everything. And he pretends as kind of some kind of humanitarian gesture to free mankind from dragons, but as Hiccup calls him out, that's obviously just to control people. But he has the line where him and Hiccup are kind of staring each other down. He talks about the ultimate form of power. Power was the strength of will over others. Where everything about him is focused on dominating others. I love the way he tames the dragons or subdues them just by screaming and waving a stick around and just basically beating them into submission. And kudos to them for making me believe that a guy yelling and swinging a stick would cow a dragon, but I totally buy it. There's just something in the way he voices and it's animated that he just has this personality that he just uses to overcome everything around him. And I love how that sequence comes very shortly after the sequence where Hiccup tames all the dragons in Valka's cave, where after she kidnaps him and he pulls out his sword and does all the fire tricks, kind of subduing them by becoming one of them. He shows the difference with how Drago does it by simply imposing his will on others. Even the great Bewilderbeast, like Valka's Bewilderbeast, is like this huge, wonderful, majestic creature. And even though the other one is almost identical, he still feels like a broken, chained animal. There's just something kind of half crazed and just subdued about that character because Drago has conquered him. And as the end comes around, where it finally becomes the test of those two types of loyalty, where Hiccup is a leader because he makes those under him love him, and Drago does it through fear. And in the end, we see which is better. When the time comes, everyone is going to go to the one they love rather than the one they fear.
Yeah, Drago is terrifying, both in stature and in character design, and the way his face is all scarred up and his missing limb, as we discover later. And I, like you said, I completely believe that he's able to subdue these dragons with this terrifying screeching, and it's awful. But he's so overconfident. He so strongly believes in his hold on the dragons that he doesn't even really try to stop Hiccup, which, like I said, is his downfall. He believes Hiccup's victory to be impossible. He sits there and dares Hiccup to try and release Toothless from the hold of the alpha, of the Bewilderbeast. And Toothless does it because his bond with Hiccup. Oh, Hiccup does it because his bond with Toothless is so strong. See, there I go again, because they're one and the same. But it's just really cool that Hiccup is able to show that loyalty does win over subduction, subduing your prey, or whatever you want to call them. And we actually... Oh, go ahead.
Along those exact same lines is, Toothless becomes the alpha, not by trying to overcome the others, but it's an act of love. It's his action to try and protect Hiccup that leads him to become so fierce and get his Godzilla form, which is absolutely amazing. The blue lights along his back and tail, and then he challenges the alpha as an act of love towards Hiccup, which is what inspires the rest of the dragons to follow him as the leader.
And Valka is the one who points that out to us. It's really a cool scene because, again, it's Toothless revealing secrets about himself that we didn't know, because he is a Night Fury. He is the last of his kind, so it seems, and we don't know anything about them. So they're really able to introduce things about this type of dragon specifically that might not be able to fly literally on other dragons, just because they're documented, they're known. And so I love that.
And Toothless, just because it's really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. And you see the glowing blue eyes, and all of a sudden, Toothless is glowing, and he's angry, and he's all about protecting Hiccup, because he realizes that he did kill Stoic, and Hiccup had that moment of anger, but understood that it wasn't really Toothless's fault. But Toothless is angry about it, and he says, "What you made me do to Stoic, I'm not going to do to Hiccup, no matter what you try to do to me or how you might try to control me." And it's all, like you said, a protection of Hiccup, and it ultimately seals his victory. And in this idea of loyalty versus fear, we actually see that personified in the character of Eret. So it's a little bit more on the nose than the dragons themselves, because he's a character who's an example of how our minds can be changed in an instant. And also how, as we've said multiple times, loyalty is more powerful than fear. He's all about following Drago. And at the beginning of the film, he says, this is what happened to me. And he shows this scar on his chest, this giant brand on his chest given to him by Drago for failing to bring in the dragons he was supposed to, failing to meet his quota. And he's driven by that fear of something worse happening. And even though he brings in the Astrid and the others and their dragons, Drago turns against him and says, "You failed me one too many times. You're useless. Your usefulness has run out. You're gone." Well, that's when Stormfly, Astrid's dragon, jumps in and saves him, and he's astounded. Why would that happen? Why would that dragon do that? And that starts the change in him. And it's a little bit faster because, it did save his life. And he does have that moment where he's able to thank Stormfly face to face and say, "Thank you, and let me return the favor." And it's really cool how he does have that sudden turn to where he becomes a good guy. And I'm actually grateful at the end of the film when Toothless... when Hiccup offers his father's dragon to Eret because he's earned his trust.
Yeah, and I like how from the very first moment we meet him, even though he's a dragon trapper and he's kind of a bad guy, you can see that he has a very healthy respect for the dragons. And there's a brief moment when he takes a Hiccup's sword and throws it overboard, and Stormfly goes and fetches it. He just kind of looks in wonder, like it's like something he's never seen from a dragon before. I like to think that's the first moment that kind of gets under his skin. To thinking differently about the dragons, till obviously when Stormfly rescues him and then he joins them. And I think a big theme in this film is forgiveness. Stoic forgiving Valka, and obviously Toothless forgiving. Forgiving Toothless for killing his father, and in the end, it's the tribe forgiving Eret. It's showing us the possibility of redemption, and I think he's a great way to show that. And Kit Harington's just super likable in the role.
I really like the character. I like the character design. I think he's a welcome addition to the cast, and he's supposed to be returning for the third film as well. So I'm excited to see possibly more growth from him as he becomes accustomed to the ways of Burke and has a dragon of his own and learns the power of loyalty and trust to a dragon, that connection.
Yeah, it'd be really cool if they challenge him so we can see, if he's really changed.
Are there any other characters you wanted to talk about? I mean, I like Astrid, but she doesn't have a whole lot of personal growth in this film, sort of like in the first one, to be honest. But I like her. I like the side characters, Fishlegs, Snotlout, Spitelaut. Well, Spitelaut's his father. Rough Nut and Tough Nut. All those characters are just as fun. I was talking to you before we started the movie, or before we started recording the podcast tonight. This movie isn't nearly as quotable as the first one is. There's lots of great one-liners from all the characters in the first one that I quote all the time. Not even kidding. I quote the first one all the time. And this one just isn't that kind of film, and that's okay. But it just means that those side characters aren't quite as memorable this time around as they were in their introduction.
Yeah, I as you said, Astrid, she doesn't really get an arc, but I do like her character. This the scene in the beginning between her and Hiccup, which I think is just a really lovely moment of where you see how the relationship has progressed, and I like that she's kind of dropped that really angry false bravado that she had in the first film, and kind of she's still fierce, but it's a much more mature and thoughtful character that we see, even though she doesn't get an arc. I think she's a really good presence, and the moments she does have with Hiccup, I think, are really good.
Yeah, I do like her more this time around than in the first one. Not that I dislike her in the first film, but if I do have any sort of minor, very like thin slices of criticism on the first film, it's just that Astrid's dialogue is somewhat wooden in a couple of scenes, and I think it's better here, and she is more mature, so I appreciate that. But that being said, I mean, like I said, I like the other characters. There's just not a whole lot for them to do here aside from just be in the background, do their job as support, and have their tiny moments throughout. They do have some of that comic relief that we do need after stuff like Stoic's death.
But I grew facial hair for you.
Me too. Any other characters, or I mean, Gobber. I love Gobber. But...
Oh yeah, how could we not? How could we forget Gobber? He doesn't get nearly as much screen time, again, like Astrid, sadly, but every line he has is gold, and Craig Ferguson is just hilarious. But then the moment where he does that speech, a warrior, a chieftain, a father, a friend, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Emotional destruction, round 2.
Yeah, and it's so good.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to talking about music. John Powell, man, as I said, he is the king of animated scores. I don't know many people in the film score community who would argue that there's a better animated composer than John Powell. He just brings out all the stops. He's always on top of his game, and just like the first movie's score is one of my favorite scores of all time. It's that good.
Yeah.
The main theme, this is Burke. This is the romantic flight theme, that romance theme between Hiccup and Astrid. The test drive sequence, which was my ringtone for like 2 years.
Amazing.
It's amazing how much quality came from the first film's score, separate from the film. Forbidden Friendship, for sure. Yeah, and it's just as good the second time around. He brings back all of those familiar themes that we love, and he matches that first score beat for beat, brings back those themes, brings back new themes, and it is just so amazing, again, that the efforts in the sequel were matched in the second. The efforts from the first film were matched in the second film. It just blows my mind that we got another fantastic 10 out of 10 score from John Powell for this film.
Yeah, I think my favorite, it's a toss-up between Flying with Mother and For the Dancing and the Dreaming. Just Flying with Mother is just this absolutely joyful kind of thing, underscoring all these crazy flights they're doing. And then For the Dancing and the Dreaming, it's just this lovely little love song between them, and the melody is just really catchy. Can't think of it. I think Two New Alphas is also, I think, pretty awesome. It's like super triumphant. It doesn't have as many like of the really great memorable themes as the first one, but the ones that are there are very, very, very good.
Yeah, the newer themes, the main ones that stand out are the themes for Stoic and Valka herself, and then also Drago's theme, which is like a ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-da. It's really cool. Really big and bold.
Oh yeah, and Where No One Goes, which is
the
Yancey song, which is absolutely thrilling.
And it's an interpolation of Test Drive. Like it uses the elements from that song, that track in the first film, to mimic the sequence at like almost a more intense sequence. It's so cool how he's able to interpolate that track from the first film into this sort of pop music. I wouldn't really call it pop music. It's more on the folk side of things, but it's energetic. It doesn't feel out of place in the film, which could have been a concern for a song with lyrics, aside from For the Dancing and the Dreaming, which fits in very well. But we get it in that beginning sequence, and we get it, I think the same song, just a separate section of the same song at the very end of the film as well. And I really love Yancey in both films. I think his sound is unique and brings something unique to the film.
Yeah, they released that Where No One Goes sequence as the first teaser trailer. That was when I knew this is going to be a great film. Because that sequence is just great. I meant to mention this earlier. I love how the flights are shot. The film is very much shot like a live action. Everything feels like an organic camera movement. And I think an issue with a lot of animated films is they take the fact that they have a digital camera that can do anything, and they do anything. And while you can get a lot of cool shots, you lose a sense of gravity and weight. I love that, every time a dragon flies by the camera, it shudders, and every movement feels like something you could really see, and it makes you feel like you are really there flying with these dragons. And that flight sequence is just showing off all those techniques, and it's one of the most thrilling sequences I've ever seen.
I agree, 100%, and I think that's definitely thanks to Roger Deakins in at least some small way. I'm sure he helped to improve a talent that was already there, but it's just we're raving, and so we should probably move on. But there's just so many good things to say about this. So let's sort of get to our closing section: relevance, takeaways. There's some heavy stuff in this film. What's one of the themes you take away?
A balanced foreign policy.
Yeah.
Just don't go looking for a fight, but I like that it. I think a lesser film would have gone for a completely pacifistic angle. But I like that this film recognized don't look for a fight, try for peace, but be ready to protect your people if it comes to that. I really like that. And then obviously the how the different ways to get people, or in this case, dragons, to follow you through loyalty. We talked about that earlier, but loyalty and versus fear. And then just that final monologue that you read at the opening. The people who oppose us are relentless and crazy. The people that stop them even more so. We are the voice of peace, and bit by bit we will change this world. It's like it takes active, relentless work to change the world for the better. The quote, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. It's the idea that, change for good is possible, but it takes work. It takes a fight. It takes people willing to, go out there and do what needs to be done. And I love that that's how the film ends. It's a kid's film, and giving them, the idea that if you want the world to be better, you have to do that yourself. You can't sit around and expect the world to get better if you're not willing to fight for it.
Yeah, I like the parallel between Toothless becoming the alpha of the dragons and Hiccup very similarly becoming the alpha among his people, because both of them do so through protecting their peers, protecting their kind. So we have that parallel between those two characters, again, how they're so similar and connected with each other. They learn from each other, they build off of each other, and that is also taken from Stoic's death. there's a quote from Valka after Stoic sacrifices himself, and she's trying to explain to Hiccup that Toothless didn't do it on purpose. He couldn't have helped it. She says, good dragons under the control of bad people do bad things. And it's the same in our world. Good people under bad influences can do bad things. So I think the film is really trying to show us that we have to resist. We have to keep ourselves in the company of good people with good influences so that we can continue to act good. And that's exactly what you were just saying. We have to affect change in the world. It doesn't just happen. If we don't do anything, then the bad happens. And so it's an action. It's something that we have to actively pursue. But I also like that in Hiccup trying to find himself and eventually finding himself, he learns that we are our own people. We don't have to follow in the footsteps of those before us, but also it's not a bad thing when we do. I think it's showing us that Hiccup had to go about this path in his own way. He didn't just blindly follow. Not that there's anything wrong with following what your parents do, but do you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to not go in circles too much. But Hiccup borrows eventually from both his father as a leader and his mother as a dragon whisperer, and he bridges the gap, brings an element of peacekeeping that wasn't present before. It's like a triangle where you have his mother and father on one point, and then he's on the third, and they become a circle by the end of the film where they're overlapping, and they're all he's taken the values of all and put them together. And I think that it's important to realize that yes, we are our own people, but no, it's not a problem. It's not a bad thing to follow the examples of those who came before.
Yeah, I think it's a super balanced perspective. Again, a troubling aspect of a lot of films, and especially those directed at teenagers, is the past is a problem that has to be overthrown. And obviously, since humans are flawed, every generation has its flaws, and each next generation has to face those problems, and hopefully overcome them. But also, every generation has the things that made it function as a society, made it work, and if you can't just go about trying to tear apart a culture from the ground up. You have to take what worked, take the good aspects of that culture, and then be the change you want. So the fact that this gives such a balanced perspective as opposed to so many other kids films, I find very refreshing.
Yeah, it's not saying you have to be your own person and ignore what everybody else says to you. It's part of that, but it's also part of taking the advice and listening to people and learning from people. And I think that's a very valuable lesson from a kid's movie. It's very Pixar of DreamWorks to bring that to us, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, any closing thoughts? Any final thoughts to say about the movie or anything we haven't addressed yet?
I could talk for a lot longer about this film.
I'm sure both of us could, but it is now 1 a.m. where I'm at, and as much as I would love to continue talking, I think that we've done justice with what we've done so far.
Yeah.
So that is the end of the official 71st episode of Cinescope. Thank you so much, Gabe, for being patient with me and my schedule and talking with me about this outstanding movie.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I loved it.
Contact for the show, facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and @Cinescope Pod on Twitter. Please continue to go over to iTunes, rate and review, subscribe if you haven't already, or you can do that on the Apple Podcast app on your iOS device. If you have any other feedback or ideas, you can email thecinescopepodcast@gmail.com, or to contact me about co-hosting, you can do that as well. I do have a few people who have contacted me about that and I haven't responded, so please be patient. I will get in touch with you eventually because I'd love to have new voices on the show in addition to our returning voices. So if you have a movie that you love and think you can talk about it for a good long while like we just did, let me know because I'd love to have you on. Now, Gabe, where can people find you and your work online?
So like I said earlier, if this is going up tomorrow, I think our first episode of Franchise Fatigue should be up within a couple days of that. So you can go to franchisefatiguepodcast.com. We're on Facebook as Franchise Fatigue Podcast and on Twitter as Franchised Pod. And we are reviewing the Indiana Jones series for our debut.
Yeah, and like we mentioned earlier, I am on the 4th episode of that with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. If you'd like to hear some of my defense of the film, also some of my criticisms of the film, that'll be fun to tune into, I hope. Now, the best place to find me on Twitter is at Chadadada. That is CHADADADA. Also, facebook.com/chad.hopkins. And you can listen to my other podcast, An American Workplace, where we talk about NBC's The Office. We're about halfway, a little past halfway through season 3 so far. You can find out where podcasts can be found and at workplacepodcast.com. And all the show notes and contact information for this show can be found at Cinescope Podcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thank you, Gabe. It's been awesome having you on the show. I hope you had a great holiday and Happy New Year.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 71. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 72. Have fun and celebrate movies.